Again, let me ask you first of all here what you were thinking as all of this unfolded, about how this came together and the closeness of the vote.
Well, David, I think the last time we spoke, clearly the discussion was around how important it was that the health care bill get over the first hurdle, which was to pass the House. And I know it was a big win yesterday, but just one of the first steps in a long process, not only to get the health care reform bill done, but also that acts as a gateway issue in order for the Congress to take up next year's fiscal budget, which is necessary as a predecessor to bringing up tax reform. So that we've got a long way to go, but certainly a huge win yesterday. I think not only for the Republicans in Congress, it was for the American people, but also as the business community looks towards Washington to see whether they're actually going to be able to deliver on President Trump's agenda.
How much engagement can there be here going forward with the Senate? Mark Crumpton just a moment ago quoting Senator Orrin Hatch, counseling here that there should be some management of expectations. How does the White House, how does the House work with the Senate here to make sure the Senate stays on a timetable that they'd like to see?
Well, the Senate operates with a labyrinth of rules that aren't necessarily easily understood by anyone other than the Senate parliamentarian. So there is going to be some waiting because the Senate is unable to act without the CBO budget score. And then there are some fairly arcane rules that the parliamentarian in that body will have to apply to the House bill, and as to whether the provisions in that legislative vehicle are compliant with the procedure called reconciliation under which the Senate will act, which will allow for a lower voting threshold, no filibuster, in other words, so only a 51 vote required to pass the bill.
The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell released a statement yesterday. At the bottom of that was some background information about how he intends to proceed, and he said, Mr. Cantor, he's going to wait for a score from the Congressional Budget Office. Do you think it was a mistake that his colleagues in the House did not do that? Do you think that they're going to regret not waiting on a score from that nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office?
No, David. This was just reporting by the press. It was, I think, inaccurate, blown out of proportion, because it's fairly typical for legislative vehicles to move with a base score by the Congressional Budget Office, which the vehicle that they passed yesterday, the bill that was passed out of the House, did have an initial score by the Congressional Budget Office. It was when the body was unable to pass it in 3 weeks, a month ago, that the amendment process started, and it was a few of those amendments that were not officially scored by the Congressional Budget Office. But the impact is fairly well known. I think the score, or the total number of additional dollars, was in the neighborhood of $20 billion, but it was not that it was unknown, because the base score was there, and just to add the amendments, I think there was a general idea in the direction the bill was going.
I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of Commerce this week, Wilbur Ross, and I asked him how his expectations of what Washington would be like matched or differed from how it's been over these last 100+ days. Let me just play a bit of what he had to say.
Major problem is the Republican Party is a little less unified than I had hoped, and the Democratic Party seems more unified in opposition than I would have hoped.
So, Mr. Cantor, we're becoming familiar with the Tuesday Group and the Freedom Caucus and all of that. What's your sense of the Republican Party in the House right now? Maybe how House Speaker Paul Ryan is able to manage what seems like a lot of sort of disparate factions?
Well, first of all, I mean, I would comment as to Secretary Ross's observation about the unified Democrat opposition versus where the Republicans are. This is not too different than the state of affairs in 2009 when President Obama and his party had unified control of Washington. There was a lot of disagreement about how they were going to proceed going forward with Obamacare. And in fact, remember, that took an awfully long time, close to a year to pass. So and at the same time, if you remember, that was when I was the party's whip, the Republican whip in the House. We were certainly unified against what they were trying to do, and produced no votes in support of them, President Obama's stimulus bill, the Dodd-Frank bill, or the Obamacare bill itself. So it is much easier in opposition to unify, as the cause is pretty straightforward. You want to go and stop what it is that you're opposed to. And if the majority party or the White House refuses to entertain any of your suggestions or input, then it's fairly straightforward as to what the minority or the opposition is going to do. So I agree with that. Clearly, I think that the legislative process, when you're in the majority, it's often sloppy, and I think we saw that over the last month or two with the passage now culminating yesterday in the House. But the fact is the first hurdle has been overcome, and the process will go forward.